in the human world. Yan Hui went to see Confucius, asking leave to depart. Confucius said, "Where will you go?" Yan Hui said, "I shall go to Wei." "What will you do there?" "I have heard that the ruler of Wei has reached the prime of his life and become quite autocratic in his ways. He makes frivolous use of his state without seeing his error. He thinks nothing of the death of his people. Nationfuls of corpses fill the marshes, clumped in piles like bunches of plantains. The people there are utterly without recourse. I have heard you say, 'Master, leave a well-ordered state and go to one in chaos.' At a physician's door there are always many invalids. I wish to take what I have learned from you and to derive some standards and principles from it to apply to this situation. Perhaps then the state can be saved." Confucius said, "You will most likely go and get yourself executed. If you're following a course, it's better not to mix anything extraneous into it. Mixing in the extraneous, you wind up with multiple courses, which leads to mutual interference, which means constant anxiety. And yet all your anxiety will not save you. The consummate persons of old made sure they had it in themselves before they tried to put it into others. If what is in yourself is still unstable, what leisure do you have to worry about some tyrant? Do you know what it is that undermines real virtuosity, and for what purpose, on the contrary, cleverness comes forth? Virtuosity is undermined by getting a name for it. Cleverness comes forth from conflict. For a good name is most essentially a way for people to one-up each other, and cleverness is most essentially a weapon for winning a fight. Both are inauspicious implements, not the kind of thing that can be used to perfect your own behavior. But even if your virtuosity were ample, reliable, and firm, and you engaged in no contention for the sake of a good name unless you somehow attained perfect comprehension of his mind and disposition, your high-handed display of regulating words about humanity and responsibility in the face of such a tyrant would just be a way of showing off your beauty at the expense of his ugliness. This is called plaguing others, and he who plagues others will surely be plagued in return. You are in danger of being plagued. Conversely, if he happens to be the type who takes delight in worthy men such as yourself while despising men of lesser quality, why would you want to change him in the first place? On the other hand, if you just agree with everything anyone says, the princes of the state will surely take advantage of you in their jostlings with one another. Your eyes will be dazzled by the struggle, your countenance flattened by it, your mouth busied with it, your face expressive of it, and finally your heart and mind will be completely made of it. Then it will be like using fire to put out a fire or pouring water on a drowning man. I'd call that augmenting the excessive. Beginning in this way, you'll just keep following the flow until even your sincerest words are untrustworthy, and then you're certain to end up dead at the feet of the tyrant. In ancient times, Jie killed Guanlong Feng and Zhou killed Wang Zibiqian. These were men who cultivated their own persons, devoting themselves to their love of the masses below and thus resolutely remonstrating with their rulers above. The rulers did away with them because of their impeccable characters. This is what comes from love of a good name. Yao attacked Songshi and Sun Ao, and you invaded Yuhu. These nations were laid to waste and their citizens slaughtered. They had been incessant in their use of force and insatiable in their quest for property, the things referred to by names. This is what comes from the quest for property and a good name. Hasn't anyone taught you even this? The allure of property and a good name cannot be contained even by sages, much less you. But I'm sure you've thought of some way around all this. Let's hear what you've got. Yan Hui said, "Punctilious in bearing, I shall become empty and humble. Diligent in my work, I will make myself unified and focused." Would that work? Confucius said, No. How could that ever work? Filled to overflowing with aggressive resolve but presenting an ever-changing appearance to the world so as to accommodate common opinion, manipulating the impressions of others to win a place in their hearts. I'd say even a gradually advancing virtuosity will be unable to take shape, much less the great virtuosity. If you cling without transforming, externally accommodating but internally without any self-criticism, how could that ever work? Yan Hui said, "Then I shall be internally upright but externally adaptable, using pre-existing doctrines linked to antiquity. To be internally upright is to be a follower of the ways of heaven. Such a one knows that heaven looks upon both himself and the Son of Heaven equally as sons. Would he then care whether his words were pleasing or displeasing to others? Such a one is seen by others as an innocent child. This is what I mean by being a follower of heaven. To be externally adaptable, on the other hand, means to be a follower of the ways of man. To bow and salute is the ceremony that goes with being someone's underling. Others do it, so would I dare not too? He who just does whatever others do will not be criticized by those others. To use pre-existing doctrines linked to antiquity means to be a follower of the ways of the ancients. Although one seems to speak only accepted dogmas, in reality a criticism is hidden in it, but it was the ancients who said so, not me. In this way, although upright, one cannot be attacked. This is what I mean by being a follower of the ancients. Would this work? Confucius said, no. How could that ever work? You're like a ruler with a great multitude of policies and methods, but without any foreign intelligence. Although this might well allow you to get by without being faulted, that's about all you'll accomplish. How could it have any effect on the tyrant? You are still taking your mind as your instructor. Yan Hui said, I have nothing more. What then should I do? Confucius said, you must fast. Let me tell you, to have something in mind and then go out and do that thing, do you think this is a simple matter? Majestic heaven does not accommodate those who look on this as easy. Yan Hui said, my family is poor and I have had no wine or meat for many months. Can this be considered fasting? Confucius said, that's the fasting you do for a religious sacrifice. It is not the fasting of the mind. Yan Hui said, what is the fasting of the mind? Confucius said, if you merge all your intentions into a singularity, you will come to hear with the mind rather than with the ears. Further, you will come to hear with the vital energy rather than with the mind. For the ears are halted at what they hear. The mind is halted at whatever verifies its preconceptions. But the vital energy is an emptiness awaiting for the presence of beings. The course alone is what gathers in this emptiness. And it is this emptiness that is the fasting of the mind. Yan Hui said, before I find what moves me into activity, it is myself that is full and real. But as soon as I find what moves me, it turns out that myself has never begun to exist. Is that what you mean by being empty? Confucius said, exactly. Let me tell you about it. With this you can play in his cage without impinging on his concern for a good name. When he's receptive to your crowing, but when he's not, let it rest. Do not let him get to you, but do not harm him either. Seeing all possible dwelling places as one, let yourself be lodged in whichever cannot be avoided. This will get you close to success. It is easy to wipe away your footprints, but difficult to walk without touching the ground. It is easy to use deception when you are sent into your activities at the behest of other humans, but difficult to use deception when sent into activity by heaven. You have learned how to fly with wings, but not yet how to fly without wings. You have learned the wisdom of being wise, but not yet the wisdom of being free of wisdom. Concentrate on the hollows of what is before you, and the empty chamber within you will generate its own brightness. Good fortune comes to roost in stillness. To lack the stillness is called scurrying around even when sitting down. Allow your ears and eyes to open inward and thereby place yourself beyond your mind's understanding consciousness. Even the ghosts and spirits will then seek refuge in you, human beings all the more so. This is the transformation of all things, the hinge on which Shun and you moved, the lifelong practice of Fu Shi and Ji Chu. How much more should it be so for others? Zigao of Yagong had been designated envoy to Qi. He asked Confucius for instruction, saying, the king has given me a heavy mission. The people of Qi treat envoys with great respect but are slow to make any concessions. Even the ordinary folk there are unbudgeable, how much more so the feudal lords? I am quite terrified. You once said to me, in all affairs, large or small, a happy conclusion is rarely reached unless one follows the course. Otherwise, if you fail, you will have troubles with other people, but to succeed you will have to trouble the balance of your own internal yin and yang. Only a person of virtuosity can remain untroubled whether he succeeds or fails. I am a man who has no special dietary needs, and even when drinking a steaming broth, I normally have no need for a cooler, but look at me now. I got my orders this morning and already I am sucking on ice chunks this evening as if my insides were on fire. I have not yet begun the actual task and already my yin and yang are out of whack. And if the mission turns out to be a failure, I'll surely be menaced by the people around me. Given these two problems, it is just not worth it to be employed as someone's underling. Please give me some advice. Confucius said there are two great constraints in this world. One is fate, one's mandated limitations, and the other is responsibility, doing what fits one's position. A child's love for his parents is fate, it cannot be removed from his heart. An underling's service to a boss is responsibility, the response called for by his position. Wherever he goes, he is in service to his boss. It cannot be avoided anywhere in this world. Thus I call these the great constraints. To be reconciled to wherever you may have to go to serve your parents is perfect filial piety, and to be reconciled to whatever may be involved in serving your boss is complete loyalty. And in the service one must render one's own heart, seeing that you likewise cannot change the joy and sorrow it sets before you, thus reconciling yourself to these two as a part of your fate, knowing them to be something else you can do nothing about. That is the utmost virtuosity. Being a son or a subordinate, there will inevitably be things you cannot avoid having to do. Absorb yourself in the realities of the task at hand to the point of forgetting your own existence. Then you will have no leisure to delight in life or abhor death. That would make this mission of yours quite doable. Let me tell you a little more of what I've learned. Human interactions, when handled face-to-face, are founded on mutual trust. But when handled at a distance, they must depend on words to establish reciprocal loyalty. These words have to be transmitted by someone, and there is nothing in the world more difficult than communicating mutual esteem or mutual anger between two people. The esteem gets exaggerated into flattery and the anger into insult. These exaggerations then become outright lies, and once the lying starts, trustworthiness is lost, and then the ability to communicate is destroyed, and perhaps the messenger as well. As the maxim says, transmit their usual characteristic inclinations, not their occasional exaggerations, and your task will be close to success. Another thing, when two people test their skills against each other, it starts out brightly enough but usually ends darkly. When it really gets extreme, they end up engaging in all sorts of outrageous tactics to defeat each other. A drinking ritual is orderly at first but usually ends up in turmoil, and when it gets really extreme, the amusements start to get perverse. All things are like this. They begin nicely enough but in the end it gets ugly. They start out simple but end up oversized and unwieldy. Words are like winds and waves, and actions are rooted in gain and loss. Winds and waves can easily shake a man, and gain and loss can easily endanger him. So the rage comes forth for no apparent reason, the cunning words fly off on a tangent, like the panicked cries of a dying animal with no time to choose. The breath and vital energy come to a boil, and with that everyone becomes bloody-minded. As the feeling of being threatened reaches its zenith, the more unlovely states of mind come with it, and nobody even notices it, and if they don't realize what is happening to them, there is no saying where it will all end. Thus, the maxim says, do not compromise your mission, do not hurry it to completion, for these would take it beyond the beneficial measure. Compromised missions and hurried completions are dangerous things. Beauty is something that comes from taking your time, and once the ugliness takes shape, it is too late to change it. Can you afford to be careless? Let yourself be carried along by things so that the mind wanders freely. Hand it all over to the unavoidable so as to nourish what is central within you. That is the most you can do. What need is there to deliberately seek any reward? The best thing is just to fulfill what's mandated to you, your fate. How could there be any difficulty to that? When Yan He was appointed tutor to the Crown Prince of Wei, son of Duke Ling, he went to consult with Chu Boyu. Here is a man who is just naturally no good. If I find no way to contain him, he will endanger my state, but if I do try to contain him, he will endanger my life. His cleverness allows him to understand the crimes people commit, but not why they were driven to commit these crimes. What should I do? Peng Boya said, good question. Be careful and cautious and rectify yourself. Be compromising in appearance and harmonious in mind. But even these measures can present problems. Don't let the external compromise get inside you, and don't let your inner harmony show itself externally. If you let the external compromise get inside you, it will topple you, destroy you, collapse you, cripple you. If the harmony in your heart shows itself externally, it will lead to reputation and renown until you are haunted and plagued by them. If he's playing the baby, play baby with him. If he's being lawless and unrestrained, be lawless and unrestrained with him. If his behavior is unbounded and shapeless, be unbounded and shapeless with him. You must master the skill to the point of flawlessness. Don't you know the story of the praying mantis? It flailed its pincers around to stop an oncoming chariot wheel, not realizing the task was beyond its powers. This is how it is for those with great talents. Be careful, be cautious. If you irritate him by flaunting your talents, you will be in more or less the same position. Don't you know how the tiger trainer handles it? He doesn't feed the beast live animals for fear of arousing its lust for killing. He doesn't feed it uncut sides of meat for fear of arousing its lust for dismemberment. He carefully times out the feedings and comprehends the creature's propensity for rage. The tiger is a different species from man but can be tamed through affection for its feeder. The ones it kills are the ones who cross it. However, a man who loves horses even to the point of gathering their shit and piss in jeweled boxes may still get his skull or chest kicked in if he smacks away a mosquito on the unbridled animal at the wrong time. Despite the best intentions, his solicitousness backfires on him. Can you afford to be careless? Carpenter Shi was traveling in Qi when he came upon the tree of the shrine at the Chu Yuan Bend. It was over 100 arm spans around, so large that thousands of oxen could shade themselves beneath it. It overstretched the surrounding hills, its lowest branches hundreds of feet from the ground, at least a dozen of which could have been hollowed out to make into ships. It was surrounded by marveling sightseers, but the carpenter walked past it without a second look. When his apprentice finally got tired of admiring it, he caught up with Carpenter Shi and said, "Since taking up my axe to follow you, master, I have never seen a tree of such fine material as this. And yet you don't even deign to look twice at it or pause beneath it. Why?" Carpenter Shi said, "Stop. Say no more. This is worthless lumber. As a ship it would soon sink, as a coffin it would soon rot, as a tool it would soon break, as a door it would leak sap, as a pillar it would bring infestation. This is a talentless, worthless tree. It is precisely because it is so useless that it has lived so long." Back home, Carpenter Shi saw the tree in a dream. It said to him, "What do you want to compare me to, one of those cultivated trees? The hawthorn, the pear, the orange, the rest of those fructiferous trees and shrubs, when their fruit is ripe they get plucked, and that is an insult. Their large branches are bent, their small branches are pruned. Thus do their abilities embitter their lives. That is why they die young, failing to fully live out their natural lifespans. They batter themselves with the vulgar conventions of the world, and all other creatures do the same. As for me, I've been working on being useless for a long time. It almost killed me, but I've finally managed it, and it is of great use to me. If I were useful, do you think I could have grown to be so great? Moreover, you and I are both members of the same class, namely, beings. Is either of us in a position to classify and evaluate the other? How could a worthless man with one foot in the grave know what is or isn't a worthless tree?" Carpenter Shi awoke and told his dream to his apprentice. The apprentice said, "If it's trying to be useless, what's it doing with the shrine around it?" Carpenter Shi said, "Hush, don't talk like that. Those people came to it for refuge of their own accord. In fact, the tree considers it a great disgrace to be surrounded by this uncomprehending crowd. If they hadn't made it a shrine, they could easily have gone the other way and started carving away at it. What it values is not what they value. Is it not absurd to judge it by whether it does what is or is not called for by its position, by what role it happens to play?" Ziki of Nambua was traveling in the hills of Shang when he came across a huge tree. He marveled at it, for the horses from 1,000 chariots could have cooled themselves in its shade. "What sort of tree is this?" said Ziki. "It must be of unusually fine material." Looking up at its branches, he saw that they were too twisted and gnarled to be used for beams or pillars. Looking down at its trunk, he saw that it was too splotched and split to be used for a coffin. It stung and stabbed the tongue when licked and crazed and inebriated the mind for 3 days when sniffed. Zeki said it turns out to be a worthless tree and thus it has been able to grow so huge. Ah, this is the worthlessness that the spirit man relies on. In the Jingsha region of Song grow the catalpas, cypresses, and mulberries. The tall ones are chopped down for monkey perches. Those that are 3 or 4 spans around are chopped down to make pillars for stately homes. Those that are 7 or 8 spans around are felled to make coffin shells for the wealthy. Thus, they fail to fully live out their natural lifespans and die before their time under axes and saws. This is the trouble that comes from being worth something. In the expiation ceremony, cows with white spots, pigs with upturned snouts, and humans with hemorrhoids are considered unfit to be offered as sacrifices to the river god. All shamans know this, and thus they regard these as creatures of bad fortune. But this is exactly why the spirit man regards them as creatures of very good fortune indeed. Now Shu the discombobulated was like this. His chin was tucked into his navel, his shoulders towered over the crown of his head, his ponytail pointed toward the sky, his 5 internal organs were at the top of him, his thigh bones took the place of his ribs. With his sewing and washing, he could make enough to fill his mouth, and by pounding the divining sticks and exuding an aura of mystic power, he could in fact make enough to feed 10 men. When the authorities called for troops, he would just present himself among all the others, flailing his arms in his discombobulated way without any danger of being drafted for military duty, and when it came time to take on any great labors, his chronic condition exempted him from service. When the authorities handed out rations to the disabled, he got 3 large measures of grain and 10 bundles of firewood. A discombobulated physical form was sufficient to allow him to nourish his body so that he was able to live out his natural lifespan. And how much more can be accomplished with discombobulated virtuosity? When Confucius went to Chu, the mad Nju wandered past his gate. He was singing the song, O Phoenix, how your virtuosity declines. You cannot wait for a future era, nor can you recapture the past. When the course is present in the world, the sage perfects himself with it. When the course is lacking in the world, he lives his own life with it. But in the present age, avoiding execution is the best he can do with it. Good fortune is lighter than a feather, yet no one can carry it for long. Trouble is heavier than the earth, yet no one can get it to drop away. Confronting the world with your virtuosity, let it rest, give it up. Drawing a straight line upon this earth and then trying to walk along it, danger, peril. The brambles and thorns which so bewilder the sunlight, they don't impede my steps. My zigzag stride amid them keeps my feet unharmed. The mountain tree plunders itself. The candle fat scorches itself. The cinnamon tree is edible and thus it gets chopped down. The lacquer tree is useful and thus it is cut down. Everyone knows how useful usefulness is, but no one seems to know how useful uselessness is.